Hello, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to another episode of the Classics Show. I am your host, SHABNAM RIAZ. Well, today we're going to talk about, we've got a really exciting subject that we're going to talk about, and that is fantasy adventure novels. And, there have been so many fantasy adventure novels that have become bestsellers. We've had the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling and Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings. And so many others, if we talk about childhood, there's Roald Dahl and many fantasy adventure writers, and they've really appealed to people of many, many ages. What is the secret behind these fantasy adventure novels, and why are people so, pulled towards them? So for today's program, we have with us in our studios our guest, who is Faran Kayani, who's a lawyer and also an author of 2 books, and those 2 books happen to be fantasy adventure books. Faran, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Now, Faran, fantasy adventure, the subject as it is, it's not something that everybody's thinking of writing about. How did you stumble into writing about it?
As a child, I was very hyperactive in terms of imagination, and I used to imagine a lot of things. I remember when I was a child. Do you know those cartoons, Dexter's Laboratory? And
Yeah.
so I used to imagine that I have a laboratory under my room. And
lovely.
as a child, I used to imagine a lot of things. So as I grew up, I wanted to share my imagination with other people. I remember I wrote my first storybook when I was in 3rd grade.
Okay.
It was actually, I just wrote it on a paper and I stapled the pages to convince myself that it was a book. So, I illustrated it as well.
Okay.
So, I don't know where it got lost later on, but it gave me, it gave me much needed push to actually write down something on the paper and share it with others. But obviously, when you grow up, you come to realize the realities of the world, and you get into education and make a career out of yourself. So that wish somehow went astray, and I lost along the way.
Okay.
But what happened was that I wrote my first book. I was in process of my first book. I was very much inspired by J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, Roald Dahl.
The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe.
Yeah, and J.K. Rowling. So I wanted to make a fantasy of my own.
Okay.
So Kiva, the Hidden Kingdom was my first book that I wrote. I wrote my first 3 chapters, and then later on I couldn't continue because of some family problems. My mother fell sick and she went to the hospital. So I sort of left that. So as through the process, I met someone in the hospital, and he encouraged me that, you have this thing in you, you should continue writing. And
you showed them some of your work that they...
Yeah, I mostly did, in start I did poems and stuff like that, just to, it's for catharsis sake,
Right.
to write something down. I didn't share it with much of the people, but it was just to convince myself that I'm writing something.
Okay.
But
so you wrote your poetry and you kept that to yourself?
Yeah, I kept that to myself, like most of the writers, because this is the first recognition, and showing your work is the first hurdle in the writing business. When you write something down, you have this hesitation in yourself that whether someone else will...
It takes a lot of courage.
Yeah,
it takes a lot of courage.
To get outside of the box and to share your work and your thoughts with someone else, and you have this fear inside of you that whether people will like it or whether they laugh at it,
because
or
at
whether
that
they make fun
time
of
you
you.
are in your comfort zone, you see, and you're writing and you're expressing and everything, and that's something that's such a private, personal part of you, and so that's an intimate, that's your feelings or whatever it is. Then when you're putting it out there into the world, or you're giving it to someone to review, that is a very nail-biting experience, because then you're waiting for that reaction. So what was the reaction that you got the first time that you put your work out there?
The first person was my teacher. I remember I was in college, and I showed some of my poems to my teacher, and he used to just pick out some corrections in it, and he used to correct me in many ways. So he didn't discourage me, but you can realize the positive criticism. So positive criticism is very good, but I also found that later on when I finished the first book Kiva and then this book, Five Wishes and the Prophecy of the Prince, so I remember I sent first three chapters of it to many people to get their opinions on it, to get their comments on it, and most of them liked the idea, the theme, and the concept. But I remember there was this one critic who said that please stop writing. You don't know how to write. You don't know how to. You're just destroying a novel. So please, I'd suggest you can go write columns. You have good vocabulary. You can write columns, but stop writing novels.
Okay, so when you got that feedback, that was very harsh. What
Yes,
was
of
your
course.
reaction?
I would have stopped there if.
What kept you going?
The thing that kept me going was that out of 100 people, 95% of the people said that it was very good and I should continue writing.
Right.
And the target community, especially the children and the teenagers that I sent the first 3 chapters to, they liked it a lot. So if 95 out of 100 people are saying that it's good, you should continue doing it. And if one person, you cannot go and convince everyone.
Of course.
You cannot go and say, keep everyone happy. There will always be naysayers out there. There will always be people who will put you down, who won't believe in you, who will always see the negative side of things. Even if you're in the most positive ambit, they'll always see something negative in whatever you're doing. So if I would consider a negative opinion of one person and ignore the advice of 95 others, that would be very unfair to my work.
Right, okay. So, you had this idea, you were drawn towards fantasy and adventure, as you said, growing up, Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. How important is it to give your children the right reading material at early ages, do you think, then?
I remember, unfortunately, in Pakistan, the scenario is that there are not many schools out there who actually encourage children to read outside of their textbooks.
Yeah.
There are very few OA level schools
extracurricular reading.
That encourage children to read, especially novels. I remember I've had good schooling, alhamdulillah. So in my school, my teachers would actually encourage me to read. I remember I read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory when I was in 3rd grade, and then I read Alice in the Wonderland when I was in 4th grade. So these kind of stories actually inculcated me that yes, there are things out there, there are stories out there in the world that children read. So that actually taught me and that exposed me to these genres. So as a child, I think every child has a hyperactive imagination. Most of the children have. So whatever you give to them, they try to find things that we as adults have forgotten along our way. So they try. So as a child, I was very much inclined by those fantasy things. So unfortunately, the government organizations, the government schools and Urdu medium schools, they hardly ever encourage such things in children, and it's just if they are able to complete the textbooks of the children, I think that's more than enough for them.
Yeah, and I think the problem is being overwhelmed with the current amount of books and homework. Children have to get
that's
done.
an extra burden on children.
Yeah, so that they're not having the time. So that, as you said, it's very, very important to provide children with the space to keep the imaginative streak going and keep their minds fresh.
Exactly.
And everything as well. Okay, so you had the idea, you've written the manuscript, and now you're on to publishing your book. What issues did you face?
I remember I was seeing an interview of J.K. Rowling, and she said that the happiest moment of my life was when I got a call from the publishing house and they said that your book has been published. So undoubtedly the feeling of getting published is out of the world. It's your first step towards recognition. And when as a writer, when an organization that without any cost, without any other incentive, they just say, okay, just give us your work and we're going to publish it. I think that is very encouraging for a writer. A true writer does not seek money. A true writer seeks recognition of his work and positive recognition. When people say, you know, very good, you've done well, you've done
because
good.
that's a work of art.
Yeah, of course.
And
So even Ashfaq Ahmed Saab said once that he wrote for himself, but when people started recognizing it, he was overwhelmed by it. So again, the true feeling of getting published. There are I know a lot of writers, very talented, very very imaginative writers out there who have written, who've been writing for so long. But there's this. You have to take a leap of faith.
Yeah,
First
that's
of all,
very important.
yes, you have to take a leap of faith. You have to trust in your work. You have to trust in yourself. So what most of the writers do is they just give up too early.
Yeah.
What I believe is, so they shouldn't give up too early.
In fact, some of the most, famous books in the world, when you read about the history behind them, the authors faced multiple rejections.
Multiple
Rejections.
Multiple.
And they even, some of them shared the letters that they got back from publishing companies that said, please stop writing, and this will never see the light of day, and this will never be better. And they went on to become international bestsellers and classics as well.
I'll quote J.K. Rowling. I saw her interview, and she said that while I was in process of writing, she was in process of writing the sequel of her book, and she got a letter from her mother, from a child's mother, and she said, please stop writing, you're destroying our children's future. And she said, I snapped and I replied that, please stop buying my books. So, as a writer, again, you cannot convince everyone, but you have to take a leap of faith in your work, and you just have to keep on figuring out options. There are a lot of options in, if I am able to publish such work in Pakistan, and it's very unfortunate. I was very shocked to discover this recently, that there is not even a single registered literary agent in Pakistan. That is very unfortunate. And even the publishing companies in operating in Pakistan, they are very limited in their work, and they basically don't encourage young writers to they just pick one or two titles in a year, and they don't encourage properly. Even I won't take names, but there are a lot of well-renowned publishing houses out there that only they are business-minded. They're very commercial in their approach, and they don't really care about creativity of others. I know a lot of writers. I've been receiving bundles of messages from writers, and they're actually, most of them are like, you achieved our dream. So you got published, and you got the recognition, and I'm very glad that. But at the same time, I'm very hopeful for them as well, because when they see me getting published and getting the recognition, I also want them to come out of their shells, and because I've seen some of their work, and it's very good.
So how can we help young writers who are coming along like this and they need a platform? What can be done?
The thing is that when I was in, I'm a local, from I'm from Rawalpindi, and as a local guy, the thing is that I haven't been exposed to any writing workshops. There was no guidance. I self-inculcated myself. This was all on me. Before my book got actually published by National Book Foundation, a year ago, I self-published it. So I had to spend like 3 to 4 lakh rupees on the book, on the cover, on the illustrations, on the binding, on everything, on the book launches, on the marketing side.
Right.
So I had to spend a lot
Right.
Financially, physically, and psychologically.
Right.
I had to invest a lot in my work in order to get recognition. So this was all on me, and 95% of the writers out there, they don't do, because obviously when you get done with your education, the first part that comes into your mind is get out there and get a job.
Yeah.
So when you have a 9 to 5 job,
Yeah.
you cannot possibly invest this much into your passion.
Very true.
You just stick to your office. You go to the office, and when you come back home, you're so exhausted from the work
Right.
that you don't actually you don't want to even look at your manuscript. So the thing is that what we can do is that we can hold workshops. We can encourage young writers from government and private sectors. Even there are some private sectors who are working on this, but there's no direction coming from the government on this part.
Direction is very important. I
Very
agree
important.
with this. And also, I think it's very important to have literary groups, because I run a small literary group, and it's amazing to see the talent that people have. And when authors, we have some published authors and some people who are, just writing, when they sit together, it's the flow of information and it's the flow of knowledge, and also the feedback from what work somebody is doing, that I think is really, really important. So that's something that can be organized easily.
I'm going to state a name of a such group that I have. There's a group on Facebook by the name of Bouquet. So what they do is, it's a limited closed group of 8,000 to 9,000 people all over Pakistan and even international. There are a lot of writers and readers out there. So there are similar groups on Facebook and on other such social media platforms. What they do is, when they interact with each other, they organize meetups. They organize they sit together and they discuss ideas. There are a lot of writers and readers and even publishers when they sit together. So I've attended a few such meetings, and it's lovely to sit with the literary people. But again, those circles and those people are very limited. And I remember I read a report of UN that 60% of the Pakistanis can only write their name in Urdu. So that is very unfortunate. And when 60% of the people can only write their name in Urdu, they're not educated people. An educated person should know much more than just write his name.
True.
So when you compare that figure to the 20 crore people that we have in this country, that figure is very less. And I know that as a child or as a student, there are not much students out there who actually prefer reading. When they just even at university level, they're just concerned about getting their grades and just getting graduating from the particular institution and just getting out there. They're very limited people, limited people.
And talking about that, how much would you say that then children, and also, not just children, adults as well, everyone, how much are we missing out on then if we are just focused on sitting, in a linear pattern, and we're not entertaining that creative streak? How much are we losing out?
We're losing out a lot, because there's a saying from J.R.R. Tolkien that fantasy, people think that fantasy is not reality, but actually fantasy teaches us how to live in reality. These fairy tales, these moral lessons that we have in the stories, they actually have a very deep impetus upon the children.
Yes.
And they teach them a lot of things that as adults we cannot. So even I remember in the stories that I read when I was a child, and the lessons I got from the stories, basically the science fiction like Spider-Man, Batman, Superman, these are the things that came much like later on. The thing about fairy tale and fantasy is that it has existed from a very long time. Centuries. And it will continue to exist in the future as well. This is the power of fantasy. And when, whichever fairy tale that you read, you'll always find a moral lesson at the end. And that moral lesson sticks with children throughout their life. And if we don't focus on this thing, children will lose much more than we can anticipate.
That's very true, very true.
So,
tell us about the two wolves theme that you start the book with.
Yeah, in 5 wishes. Well, 5, I'm going to talk about the book now because it's a series. 5 wishes is a series. Prophecy of the Prince is the first part of this series. I'm writing the second part, 5 wishes in the dawn of the Wizard Lords. I've just finished 7 chapters. So the thing is that all of this, the 5 wishes, the first name that I decided was 5 witches. But I changed it into wishes because these were the wishes of these 5 sisters who changed their life. It's a story about 5 fairy sisters. Now, fairy is a creature in our mind. When we say a fairy, a vibe of goodness come into our minds.
Oh, yes.
A fairy cannot be bad. Fairy is good.
They're granting wishes and they're getting things done.
They grant wishes and they help people and stuff like that. So, but if you see the book, it turns these fairies into witches.
Okay.
Right? So this is a transition from good to bad.
Okay.
And from bad to good. So the thing is that the two wolf theme, that it's basically a Native American folktale.
Yeah.
That every person has 2 wolves in them. A dark wolf and a light wolf. We are born with it actually. And our appearances, our background, our religion, it doesn't matter. Even a pious and a noble person can turn into an evil person, and even an evil bud can turn into a flower. So the thing is that we are too much swayed by the appearance of people.
Yeah.
We are too much focused on the appearance of people. We very much ignore what's going on inside.
That's very true.
So the main theme is, if you open the book, there's a poem in the start. It says that all it needs is a will to corrupt. So all you need is basically a wish. If you will to corrupt yourself, if you wish to,
and the right opportunity.
Yeah. So there are these 2 wolves in every person, and the folktale says that your personality becomes like that of the wolf you feed more.
Yes.
So if you feed the white wolf, you'll grow up to be a good person. If you feed the bad wolf, you'll grow up to, the bad wolf will be bigger and better than the white wolf. So it will dominate your personality.
And that is also, so you can relate to that straight away, can't you? Because we're also talking about the power of positivity. The more of a positive mind you hold, the more you get to see the good of a situation, because many things are just about perception and the way you're looking at something. So if your perception is where you are in a state of gratefulness, thankfulness, and you will take positively what's going around you, you will see that in fact you are feeding that element of your personality to make it stronger. But on the other hand, vice versa, when you start feeding the negative side of your personality, and you will find that you keep falling. And it does work that way. That's absolutely true.
The Robert Frost said that 2 roads diverged into the woods, and I chose the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference.
Yeah.
So feeding the white wolf is obviously very hard. When you try to be good, you have to sacrifice a lot of things. You have to give up on a lot of
temptation.
Things. Yeah, you have to
resist temptation.
Exactly. So the path of the white wolf is very hard. So negativity has this
Lure to
alluring,
it,
you know,
yes.
attractiveness towards it, and it's very tempting. So
Magnetic sort
yeah.
of.
So the fairy tale, basically, the book seems like it's very for children, but it has a deep philosophy in it.
As many of those books do have that we
Yeah,
were talking
I mean,
about before as well.
like even the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit,
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
basically fairy tale,
Yeah.
but the content is very philosophical. The content is very mature, and
Yeah.
the content is for even the older people to understand.
They're very
So this is what I'm trying to do with my book. But there are a lot of moral lessons in the book that I want to relate people to. I want when a reader reads my book, he can relate his own personality with the characters. Like as a human beings, you know, there are a lot of mythical creatures inside, but those mythical creatures
are symbolic.
And those mythical creatures have the personality of human beings.
Yeah.
So everything a person can relate to it.
They're taking the forms
Exactly.
of what you want to, you know, talk about. And as is the case in many of books of this genre as well, the adventure and fantasy, there's so much symbolism, and there are layers upon layers. Everyone can come out with a different experience. Some people will touch the surface and they'll enjoy that
it's
too.
on you.
Yeah.
It's on you.
And some
how
people
much you
will be
perceive.
able to actually, you know, peel off layer by layer and understand the symbolism that's going on behind such work. Okay, now I read a bit of your work, and you start with the theme of beauty. The beauty is, you know, the beauty that the five sisters have, but then that beauty makes them rather complacent and rather, you know, they seem to think that it is a justification for them not to work hard or whatever. So you're talking about superficialness as well. Tell us about that.
The thing is that sometimes we're not appreciative of things that we have, and sometimes we take things for granted, and sometimes we as a person become very ungrateful and very unappreciative to the people around us. So we seek for these. Beauty is basically beauty, fame, and money. These are the things that, you know, compel even a common layman to when a person gets if a person does not have these things, he wishes for them. If a person has these things, he becomes arrogant. So there are two sides of everything. So people who have such things, it's very important to be humble. It's very important to be humble, and when you're not humble, bad things start to happen, and that every up has a down.
Oh yeah.
So
Definitely.
when you're going up, it doesn't mean that, you know, you're the salt of the earth and you can do whatever you want. When you're going up, you know, you've heard that a tree which has more fruit is, you know, bowing down rather than keeping straight.
And the branches are nearer to the
Branches are
ground
near
because
to the
of
ground.
the heavy
So
fruit.
the more you have,
Yeah.
you should tend to be
Low
more
key.
humble, low key,
Yeah.
and down to earth, rather than, you know, becoming arrogant. And that is, I think, the essence of Islam. It's the essence
Very
of
much so.
most of the religions around the world, to stay humble. But there are very few people who can
Handle it.
handle it.
Yeah.
So these five couldn't handle, and they wanted more, and they wanted to sustain that thing. They used it as a justification not to work. They used it as a justification to keep themselves like this forever. So basically, that was the starting will of them to corrupt. What I want to add here is that a lot of when I go to different schools and colleges and universities, there are kids of every ages, and when I talk to little children and I tell them that, you know, you are not born evil and you're not born good.
Right.
You're in the middle.
Right.
So all these, I ask them questions that, you know, which is the most evil person you think there is. So some children shout, you know, politicians or some names of politicians and stuff like that. You know what they hear at home. So what then at the later I correct them that the right now in the contemporary year, the baddest people, the most evil people are terrorists. So even terrorists are children like you. When they are born, they are children like you. They're not born evil. Basically, when they grow and they are inculcated bad things, they are exposed to an evil environment, and they are told that the things that they will do in future are justified somehow.
Yeah.
They justify their evil actions.
Yeah.
So when the thing is that when you start giving foolish justifications for being proud, foolish justifications for being evil, and foolish justifications for being a bad person, that is the thing actually when a person starts, it's the budding process, and you don't get to the level of evilness right from the start.
No,
You start from the
it's very-
most basic sins.
Oh, yeah.
You start from the basic, like you start to envy, and then you start lying, and you start cheating, and this is how the graph
The moral
actually.
compass is very slow
So
to steer off
after a
course.
period of time, you start ignoring the small bad things, and you start doing the big bad things, and this process starts. It continues until you become a very, very bad person.
True.
And when you become a very, very bad person, even then you'll give.
You'll have justifications.
Yeah, you'll always have foolish justifications for your evil works. So in our perception, that act may have been very evil, but they'll always say,
Well, this happened because of this.
yeah,
So this was the reason that I
this
had
was
to
the
do
reason
this.
why exactly.
Yeah. What are the most fascinating sort of feedback you've had from whether they've been children or young adults or even people of an older generation? What are the most fascinating things that people have said to you after reading your book and have really, inspired you and motivated you to keep writing?
The thing is that this is not actually a typical novel. It's I call it a povel.
Yeah,
So-
I like that term.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because if you see, it's the dialogues, the
Yeah.
40% of the dialogues in the book are in a poem pattern.
Right.
So when you go through the book, it's actually the poem comes, and again the narration starts, again the poem comes, again so this process goes out throughout the book. So this is a very unique thing that even like I read Macbeth, and I read. Even there were some musicals from Roald Dahl as well, but the exaggeration with the rhyming wasn't this much. So it's like a book adaptation of a Hollywood musical movie. If you've seen Sweeney Todd and Demon Babble of the Free Street, if recently if you've seen Beauty and the Beast, the La La Land, So I wanted something different. I wanted something which most people can relate to, which has not been done before. So that is why most of the foreign publishers are I'll be very honest, I've also been exposed to rejections a lot. They've said it's a very good idea. Most of the publishing companies said it's a very good idea, but we don't want to invest on an experiment. The thing is that we don't know how the public would react to such a thing.
Yes.
Because this genre, the word that I said, povel or sing-along fantasy adventure, it doesn't exist. So this is something new. So it's very, I don't know when the idea would click, but most of the people who've read the book and they like this idea a lot. The rhyming and the songs, and this is very tempting for the children, and when especially mothers who read this to their children, they say it's a very good bedtime story, and it actually has 20 chapters. It's a first part, so the first part has 20 chapters in it. So they say we try to finish each chapter every night to our children. So I think, like I said before, the greatest mirth of an author is to get positive criticism, the positive feedback from the audience, and the recognition. So this is all it.
Right. So, Faran, it's been lovely talking to you. Unfortunately, we're reaching the end of the program. Your message to people who are watching the program, who are writers, whether young or old, any age group, and they have their work, they're scared to put it forward, or what advice can you give them?
It's basically a very common advice which everyone says, and this advice basically is not limited to writers. It's one advice that is applied in every social aspect of human society, whether you want to become a very successful sports person, whether you want to excel in exams, whether you want to do anything which you want to do, anything what you are passionate about, is that keep banging your head with the wall until you go through the wall. It's a process, it's a universal process that if you keep on doing something, eventually you'll go through it. And self-belief is very important.
Yes.
And don't be afraid to, don't let the fear inside of you hold you back. Because the fear in most of the writers of today is that if the first fear is writing, the second fear is sharing your work with the other. The third fear is getting published. So there are a lot of fears involved.
Yeah, you have to be brave.
You have to be very brave, and you have to believe in your work, and you have to believe in yourself. And self-belief is actually, before I've heard this many times, that before anyone else believes it, you yourself have to believe it. So self-belief is very
One
important.
of the most important.
And if I can do it, anyone can.
Right.
So that's it.
Right, okay. Faran, thank you very much for being a guest
you
on
for
today's
having
show and to talk about such a wonderful subject.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and with that we come to the end of today's show. Well, Faran had some really important things to say there. Yes, believe in yourself, because when you believe in yourself, that's when everybody else will believe in you too. So until next week, stay happy. Bye-bye.